She slept with her ex on a work trip, came back pregnant, and tried to blame me. The DNA test spoke louder than her lies. What started as a typical Tuesday evening conversation would unravel 3 years of what I thought was a solid relationship built on trust and shared goals. I was reviewing quarterly reports on my laptop when Jessica walked into our living room with that particular expression she wore when she wanted something expensive or complicated. As a software developer at a mid-sized firm, I valued straightforward communication, but Jessica had this way of packaging requests in layers of justification that should have warned me something was off. "I have incredible news about a career opportunity," she announced, settling beside me with her phone already displaying what looked like conference information. "There's this amazing professional development weekend in Las Vegas next month, and Blake mentioned they still have spots available for marketing specialists." Her ex-boyfriend from college who'd recently started working at some tech startup downtown. The same Blake she'd dated for 2 years before we met, the one who still liked every single one of her Instagram posts within minutes of posting. "Blake's going to this conference?" I asked, trying to keep my voice neutral while mentally calculating how this could possibly be appropriate. "Of course he's going. He's the one who told me about it. It's perfect timing since I've been wanting to expand my network in digital marketing." Jessica worked as a marketing specialist at a local startup, and while she was ambitious, she'd never mentioned any burning desire for Vegas conferences before Blake entered the picture. "What kind of conference is it exactly?" I pulled up the website she'd shown me, scanning through generic corporate buzzwords about synergy and innovation. Something felt manufactured about the whole presentation, like a sales pitch designed to overcome obvious objections. "It's focused on emerging trends in social media marketing and client acquisition strategies. Exactly what I need to move up to senior specialist level." She spoke with the practiced enthusiasm of someone who'd rehearsed this conversation. The speakers include some major industry leaders, and the networking opportunities alone could be worth thousands in future business. When I suggested we look into attending together or researching other similar conferences closer to home, Jessica's demeanor shifted noticeably. "This isn't about us, it's about my career advancement. I thought you'd be supportive of me investing in my professional growth." The guilt trip felt calculated, designed to make me seem like the unreasonable one for questioning a weekend trip with her ex-boyfriend. "I am supportive. I just think it's worth exploring all options before committing to something that expensive." The conference fee was $1,200. Plus flights and accommodation in Las Vegas during peak weekend rates. "You're being controlling and you know it." Blake offered to help coordinate travel arrangements since he's already registered, which could save us both money on group rates. The fact that she'd already discussed travel arrangements with Blake before even mentioning the conference to me was revealing enough. Over the next few days, I did some discreet research through mutual connections in the tech industry. What I discovered made my stomach drop. Blake had been laid off from his startup position 3 weeks earlier, information that was circulating among our professional network but apparently hadn't reached Jessica. More concerning, when I searched for the specific conference she'd mentioned, I found no official registration website, no speaker lineup, and no venue information beyond what looked like a hastily created landing page. I found out Blake was actually fired from his job last month. I told Jessica that evening, watching her face carefully for any sign of recognition. "Fired? That's impossible. He just got that promotion to senior account manager." Her immediate defensiveness told me everything I needed to know about how much they'd been communicating. I heard it from 3 different people at the networking event last week. His entire department was eliminated due to budget cuts. Jessica's expression went through several rapid changes: surprise, anger, then something that looked almost like panic. Even if that's true, which I doubt, it doesn't change anything about the conference opportunity. "Jessica, I couldn't find any legitimate information about this conference existing. The website looks fake, there's no verifiable speaker list, and now the person who told you about it doesn't even have a job in the industry." I'd printed out screenshots of my research, hoping concrete evidence might cut through whatever fantasy she'd constructed. "You're really going to sit there and accuse me of lying about my own career development? This is exactly the kind of unsupportive behavior that's been holding me back." She stood up abruptly, pacing around our coffee table with theatrical indignation. Blake has been nothing but helpful and professional, and you're trying to sabotage my opportunities because you can't handle me succeeding. The conversation devolved from there, with Jessica accusing me of jealousy, possessiveness, and trying to control her career choices. No amount of evidence seemed to matter when weighed against whatever Blake had told her about this magical conference that would transform her professional life. Fine, she finally declared after an hour of circular arguments. I'm going anyway. I've already requested the time off work, and I'm not going to let your insecurity destroy what could be the most important weekend of my career. Looking back, I should have recognized that moment as the end of our relationship, but I still believed logic and evidence might eventually penetrate whatever spell Blake had cast over her judgment. Jessica left for Las Vegas on a Friday morning with 3 oversized suitcases and a wardrobe that seemed more suited for romantic getaways than professional conferences. I watched her pack designer dresses and lingerie while she explained how important it was to dress for success and make good impressions on potential business contacts. The whole scene felt surreal, like watching someone prepare for a date while insisting it was a job interview. Within hours of her departure, Jessica's social media activity began telling a completely different story than the one she'd sold me. Her Instagram stories showed champagne toasts at expensive steakhouses, couples massages at luxury hotel spas, and romantic sunset photos from what was clearly a high-end resort rather than any conference venue. Every post was carefully cropped to avoid showing her companion, but the romantic ambience was unmistakable in each perfectly staged shot. The most damning evidence came through our shared credit card account, which I monitored obsessively throughout the weekend as charges appeared for increasingly intimate experiences. Friday evening brought a $340 dinner at a celebrity chef restaurant, followed by $180 worth of premium cocktails at a rooftop bar that specialized in romantic atmospheres. Saturday morning showed spa charges for couples treatments totaling $520, then lunch at another upscale restaurant for $190. How's the conference going? I texted her Saturday afternoon, genuinely curious how she'd explain the obvious pattern of romantic spending. Amazing! Learning so much about client psychology and premium service delivery. The networking dinners have been incredible for making connections. Her response came with a selfie from what appeared to be a poolside cabana, complete with champagne flutes and resort amenities that definitely weren't part of any professional development package. When I started investigating our shared cloud storage account, looking for any documentation about this supposed conference, I discovered something that made my blood run cold. Jessica had been researching romantic Las Vegas getaways for over 6 weeks, with browser history showing searches for Best Couples Spas Vegas, romantic restaurants with private dining, and luxury suites with jacuzzis. The timeline revealed she'd been planning this trip long before she'd ever mentioned any conference to me, with detailed research into the exact experiences she was now posting about on social media. Sunday brought more of the same expensive romantic activities, including a $280 dinner at a restaurant that explicitly marketed itself as perfect for proposals and anniversaries. When I called the hotel concierge to ask about conference facilities, they confirmed no professional events were scheduled that weekend, just the usual tourist activities and entertainment options. My attempts to reach Jessica by phone went straight to voicemail, with her text responses becoming increasingly delayed and vague about her schedule. In important sessions all day, "We'll call tonight," became her standard response, even as her social media showed her lounging by pools and enjoying spa treatments during supposed conference hours. The final piece of evidence came when I researched the conference organizers she'd mentioned. The company name led to a disconnected phone number, and their supposed website hadn't been updated in over 2 years. Industry colleagues I contacted had never heard of the organization, and a reverse image search revealed the conference materials Jessica had shown me were stock photos from a generic event planning website. By Sunday evening, I documented enough evidence to fill a legal brief proving Jessica's deception, but part of me still hoped for some reasonable explanation when she returned. The credit card charges alone told the story of a romantic weekend that had cost us nearly $2,400, money we'd been saving for our own wedding expenses that was now funding her reunion with Blake. When Jessica finally texted Sunday night about her flight being delayed, I knew she was buying time to construct whatever story would explain away the obvious evidence of her betrayal. Jessica returned Monday evening with an elaborate performance about keynote speakers and breakthrough networking sessions that would have been impressive if I hadn't already documented the real nature of her weekend. She unpacked souvenirs from luxury boutiques while describing fictional presentations on digital marketing trends, her enthusiasm seeming forced and rehearsed like she'd practiced these stories during her delayed flight home. The disconnect between her romantic weekend expenses and these professional development tales created a surreal atmosphere where we were essentially living in parallel realities. The speaker from Google talked about leveraging emotional connections in brand messaging, she explained while pulling designer lingerie from her suitcase that definitely hadn't been part of any conference agenda. And the workshop on premium client experiences gave me so many ideas for improving our customer engagement strategies. I listened to her elaborate fiction while reviewing the credit card charges on my phone, noting how her supposed learning experiences perfectly coincided with couples' spa treatments and romantic dinners that cost more than most people's monthly rent. The breaking point came when Jessica left her phone unlocked on our kitchen counter while showering, and I discovered dozens of intimate photos with Blake that she'd apparently forgotten to delete. The images told the complete story of their weekend reunion, romantic dinners where they were clearly the only two people at private tables, couples massages where they were photographed holding hands, and hotel room selfies that left nothing to the imagination about the nature of their relationship. Every photo contradicted her conference narrative so blatantly that I wondered if she'd lost touch with reality entirely. "We need to talk about your trip," I said when she emerged from the bathroom, my phone displaying the most damning evidence of her deception. Jessica's face went through rapid changes as she processed being caught with irrefutable proof, her confident storytelling immediately replaced by panic and defensive anger. "Those pictures aren't what they look like. Blake was just being generous with dinner reservations and spa treatments as networking gestures." "Networking gestures?" "Jessica, these are romantic couple photos in hotel rooms. You're literally holding hands during massages and kissing in restaurant booths." I scrolled through image after image of intimate moments that would have been beautiful if they'd involved her actual fiancé instead of her ex-boyfriend. "You're taking everything out of context." Blake knows people in the hospitality industry, so he was able to arrange upgraded experiences that happened to look more personal than they actually were. Her explanations became increasingly desperate as I showed her evidence that contradicted every aspect of her conference story. The conversation exploded into accusations and counter-accusations, with Jessica alternating between outright denial and attempts to minimize the significance of what was obviously a romantic reunion weekend. "Even if we did spend some personal time together, it doesn't mean anything happened between us. We're both adults who can maintain professional relationships without crossing boundaries." But the photos showed boundaries being demolished repeatedly, with intimate moments that went far beyond any reasonable definition of professional networking or conference attendance. "Jessica, you lied about everything. The conference doesn't exist, Blake was fired weeks ago, and you spent our wedding savings on a romantic weekend with your ex-boyfriend while telling me it was career development." I'd printed screenshots of my research, creating a comprehensive timeline that exposed every layer of her deception. "You're being completely unreasonable. Just because the weekend had some personal elements doesn't negate the professional value I gained from the experience." Her refusal to acknowledge basic reality even when confronted with photographic evidence revealed something fundamentally broken in either her reasoning abilities or her respect for our relationship. The arguments continued for days, with Jessica maintaining increasingly absurd explanations for obvious romantic activities while I struggled to understand how someone could lie so extensively about something so easily disproven. Our engagement ended not with dramatic confrontations but with the quiet realization that I was arguing with someone who either couldn't or wouldn't distinguish between truth and convenient fiction, making any future together impossible to imagine. Jessica moved out within 2 weeks, but her departure marked the beginning of an escalating campaign of harassment that made me question whether I'd ever really known her at all. She started showing up at my office building during lunch breaks, intercepting me in the parking garage with tearful pleas about how I was destroying our future over a simple misunderstanding that we could work through with better communication. Her visits became so frequent that my coworkers began commenting on the dramatic scenes playing out near the elevators, forcing me to ask building security to escort her off the premises when she refused to leave voluntarily. The workplace stalking expanded into a coordinated family pressure campaign, with Jessica's sister calling me at all hours to explain how I was breaking Jessica's heart and throwing away the best relationship I'd ever have over my own jealousy and insecurity. She made one mistake, her sister argued during a particularly aggressive phone call. Jessica loves you more than she ever loved Blake, and you're punishing her for trying to advance her career. When I explained about the fabricated conference and romantic photo evidence, Jessica's family initially dismissed my concerns as misinterpretations of innocent professional networking that had been blown out of proportion by my suspicious nature. Jessica's mother joined the intervention efforts, showing up at my apartment with homemade cookies and lectures about forgiveness being the foundation of lasting relationships. Young couples go through rough patches, she explained while settling uninvited on my couch. Jessica told me about your trust issues and how you've been checking her phone and monitoring her credit cards like some kind of detective. The gaslighting was remarkable in its audacity, transforming my discovery of her deception into evidence of my own psychological problems that required Jessica's patience and understanding to overcome. The family pressure campaign collapsed spectacularly when I finally shared the photographic evidence and credit card statements that documented Jessica's romantic weekend with irrefutable clarity. Her sister called back within hours, her tone completely changed from advocacy to embarrassed apology. I had no idea the situation was this serious. Jessica told us you were being paranoid about normal business networking, but these photos are clearly not professional. Jessica's mother never returned my calls after reviewing the evidence, apparently too mortified by her daughter's behavior to continue defending the indefensible. The harassment escalated when Jessica began spreading elaborate lies about our relationship through mutual friends and social media networks, painting herself as the victim of an emotionally abusive partner who had isolated her from professional opportunities through jealousy and control. Her version of events portrayed me as manipulative and possessive, someone who had sabotaged her career advancement by forbidding her from attending industry conferences and networking with male colleagues. Friends began reaching out with concerned questions about my behavior, having heard disturbing stories about financial monitoring and trust issues that supposedly characterized our relationship dynamic. Jessica's been telling people you threatened her career and tried to control who she could talk to professionally, one mutual friend informed me during an awkward coffee conversation. When I shared the real timeline and evidence with close friends, the contrast between Jessica's victim narrative and documented reality created a credibility gap that ultimately worked in my favor. The defamation campaign reached its peak when Jessica began posting cryptic social media content about narcissistic abuse and emotional manipulation, clearly targeting me without naming names but making her implications obvious to anyone who knew our situation. Her posts attracted sympathy from strangers while alienating mutual friends who knew the actual facts, creating a divided social environment where people had to choose sides based on competing versions of reality. I consulted with an attorney about harassment and defamation options, documenting every unwanted contact and false statement as evidence for potential legal action if her behavior continued escalating beyond what I could reasonably ignore. 2 months after Jessica moved out, I was settling into a peaceful evening routine when frantic pounding on my apartment door shattered the quiet stability I'd been rebuilding. Through the peephole, I could see Jessica looking disheveled and emotional, holding what appeared to be medical documents while pacing nervously in the hallway. Against my better judgment, I opened the door to find her clutching ultrasound photos and pregnancy test results with the desperate intensity of someone whose entire world depended on this moment's outcome. "I'm pregnant," she announced without preamble, her voice trembling with what seemed like genuine fear mixed with calculated manipulation. "The baby is yours, and you need to step up and take responsibility for what we created together." She pushed past me into the apartment, spreading medical paperwork across my coffee table like evidence in a court case designed to prove paternity through documentation rather than biology. The ultrasound images showed a developing fetus at approximately 8 weeks, which would place conception during our final weeks together before her Las Vegas trip, but something about the timeline felt deliberately constructed to maximize uncertainty. "Jessica," We broke up before your trip with Blake. Even if these documents are legitimate, the timing doesn't necessarily make me the father. I studied the medical paperwork while she launched into a prepared speech about responsibility and commitment that sounded rehearsed and emotionally manipulative. How can you sit there and question paternity when we were together for 3 years? This is your child, and I'm not going to let you abandon your responsibilities like some deadbeat father who runs away when things get complicated. Her accusations about abandonment were particularly rich, coming from someone who'd spent our relationship savings on a romantic weekend with her ex-boyfriend while lying about professional development conferences. The medical documents raised several concerning questions when I examined them more carefully, starting with inconsistencies in dates and provider information that suggested possible tampering or fabrication. The ultrasound photos lacked proper medical facility headers, and the pregnancy test results were printed on generic paper rather than official laboratory letterhead that would normally accompany legitimate medical documentation. Where did you get these tests done? I asked, noting that the clinic name didn't match any facilities I could find in our area's medical directories. My doctor referred me to a specialist who handles high-risk pregnancies, Jessica replied quickly, but her explanation raised more questions than it answered about why someone would need specialized care for what appeared to be a routine early pregnancy. Through our mutual friend network, I'd heard rumors about Jessica visiting fertility clinics before her Las Vegas trip, supposedly seeking consultations about reproductive health that now seemed suspiciously timed given her current pregnancy claims. The possibility that she'd been planning this pregnancy announcement as either backup plan or manipulation tactic added another layer of deception to an already complex situation involving documented lies and financial fraud. I want a paternity test, I stated clearly, watching her reaction carefully for signs of panic or resistance that might reveal ulterior motives behind her pregnancy announcement and insistence on my immediate acceptance of fatherhood. Jessica's response was immediate and explosive, with accusations about my lack of trust and inability to accept responsibility for our intimate relationship's natural consequences. A paternity test? Are you serious? You're going to put me through invasive medical procedures because you can't handle being a father? This is exactly the kind of abusive behavior that drove me away in the first place. Her transformation from vulnerable pregnant woman to angry accuser happened so quickly that it felt like watching someone switch between rehearsed emotional performances designed to manipulate different psychological responses. The conversation devolved into threats about lawyers and legal action, with Jessica claiming that demanding paternity verification was evidence of my abusive nature and inability to trust the woman who'd carried my child. Fine. She finally declared after an hour of circular arguments about responsibility and trust. If you want to traumatize your pregnant fiancé with invasive medical testing, I'll get my lawyer involved and make sure everyone knows what kind of person you really are. Jessica's legal team materialized within days of our paternity discussion, led by an aggressive family law attorney who specialized in high-conflict custody cases and had apparently been briefed on portraying me as an irresponsible deadbeat father fleeing his obligations. The initial court filing painted a devastating picture of our relationship, describing me as financially controlling, emotionally abusive, and now attempting to abandon both Jessica and our unborn child during her most vulnerable time. Her lawyer's strategy centered on establishing legal paternity through our documented relationship history rather than genetic testing, arguing that DNA verification would be traumatic for Jessica and unnecessary given our 3-year engagement and cohabitation pattern. The petition sought immediate child support starting from conception, retroactive medical expenses, and damages for emotional distress caused by my alleged abandonment and accusations of infidelity that had forced her to seek legal protection for herself and her child. My attorney reviewed Jessica's filing with the clinical detachment of someone who'd seen similar cases before, noting several tactical errors that suggested her legal team was more focused on emotional manipulation than factual evidence. They're trying to establish paternity through presumption rather than proof, he explained during our first consultation. The fact that they're resisting DNA testing this aggressively suggests they know something we don't, or they're hoping to create legal obligations before biological facts can be established. Court-ordered discovery revealed Jessica's browser history from the weeks before her Las Vegas trip, showing extensive research into paternity fraud, legal loopholes for establishing fatherhood without genetic testing, and methods for manipulating pregnancy timelines to create ambiguity about conception dates. Her search terms included how to establish paternity without DNA test, legal father versus biological father, and pregnancy dating accuracy early stages, creating a digital paper trail that suggested premeditation rather than genuine uncertainty about the child's paternity. The legal proceedings became increasingly surreal as Jessica's attorney attempted to block standard DNA testing through procedural motions, claiming the process would endanger her pregnancy and violate her medical privacy rights. Their argument that genetic testing was unnecessary due to our previous relationship completely ignored the documented evidence of her romantic weekend with Blake during the time frame when conception would have occurred. Depositions revealed significant contradictions in Jessica's timeline, particularly regarding the dates of her last menstrual period and the estimated conception window that kept shifting to accommodate her narrative about my paternity. Under oath, she struggled to explain the medical inconsistencies in her documentation while maintaining that I was definitely the father despite the obvious mathematical problems with her claimed dates. The most damaging revelation came when my attorney uncovered security footage from Jessica's Las Vegas hotel, showing her in compromising situations with Blake that definitively proved their romantic relationship had resumed during the critical conception timeframe. Hotel records confirmed they'd shared a suite for the entire weekend, with room service charges and spa appointments clearly indicating an intimate relationship that went far beyond professional networking or conference attendance. Jessica's credibility collapsed completely when confronted with video evidence that contradicted her sworn testimony about maintaining appropriate boundaries with Blake during their supposed business trip. Her lawyer's attempts to suppress the hotel footage failed when the judge ruled that paternity cases required complete disclosure of all relevant evidence, regardless of how embarrassing or contradictory it might be to the plaintiff's claims. The final blow to Jessica's case came when my private investigator discovered that Blake had fled to Canada immediately upon learning about her pregnancy, apparently having no interest in taking responsibility for the child he'd helped create during their romantic Las Vegas reunion. Phone records showed Jessica had been desperately trying to contact Blake for weeks before approaching me with her pregnancy announcement, suggesting I was her backup plan after her preferred father candidate had abandoned her completely. The court-mandated paternity test results arrived on a Tuesday morning that would forever mark the end of Jessica's elaborate deception and the beginning of her complete social and legal downfall. The DNA analysis was unambiguous in its conclusions. There was zero probability that I was the biological father of Jessica's child, definitively proving that her months of legal maneuvering and emotional manipulation had been built on lies that could no longer be sustained through clever lawyering or tearful performances. Jessica's attorney withdrew from the case within hours of receiving the results, apparently unwilling to continue representing a client whose perjury and fraud had been scientifically exposed in ways that could potentially damage his own professional reputation. The collapse of her paternity case triggered a cascade of legal consequences that my attorney had been carefully preparing throughout the discovery process, starting with perjury charges for her sworn testimony about conception dates and my alleged abandonment of parental responsibilities. My private investigator's work proved invaluable when we discovered Blake's current location in Vancouver, where he'd been working under his real name and apparently bragging to coworkers about his romantic conquest during a Las Vegas weekend that had complicated his life more than he'd anticipated. Canadian authorities confirmed Blake's employment history and timeline, corroborating that he'd fled immediately upon learning about Jessica's pregnancy through mutual friends who'd been tracking the legal proceedings with morbid fascination. The revelation that Blake had abandoned Jessica completely after their romantic reunion painted a devastating picture of her desperation to find any man willing to accept financial responsibility for consequences he'd helped create then promptly discarded. Jessica faced serious legal repercussions beyond simple perjury, including charges for filing false legal documents, attempting to defraud the court system, and defamation related to her months of social media campaigns portraying me as an abusive deadbeat father. My countersuit for emotional distress, defamation, and legal fees sought damages that reflected the genuine cost of defending against her fraudulent claims while enduring public humiliation based on lies she'd knowingly perpetuated. The judge's ruling in my favor was comprehensive and brutal, ordering Jessica to pay my complete legal expenses plus additional damages for the emotional distress caused by her calculated deception and harassment campaign. Her assets were frozen pending payment of the judgment, effectively ending her ability to continue funding legal challenges or maintaining the lifestyle she'd been desperately trying to preserve through manipulation and fraud. The social consequences proved even more devastating than the legal ones, with Jessica becoming a cautionary tale in our professional and personal networks about the dangers of elaborate deception and the inevitable exposure that follows when lies become too complex to maintain. Her former colleagues distanced themselves from association with someone whose behavior had become legendary for all the wrong reasons, effectively ending her career prospects in our city's interconnected business community. The child custody situation resolved itself when Jessica's parents petitioned for guardianship, apparently having lost confidence in their daughter's judgment and stability after witnessing the extent of her deception firsthand. Court records showed Jessica had been deemed an unfit mother due to her demonstrated willingness to use her child as a weapon in fraudulent legal schemes, leading to supervised visitation rights that reflected the court's concern about her psychological state and decision-making abilities. Blake's absence from the entire custody proceeding highlighted his complete abandonment of responsibility, leaving Jessica to face the consequences of their Las Vegas reunion entirely alone while he built a new life in Canada free from any connection to the chaos he'd helped create. The final chapter of this nightmare came when Jessica was forced to sell her possessions to pay legal judgments, moving back in with her parents in a completely different state where she could hopefully rebuild her life away from the social and professional destruction she'd created through her own choices. I kept documentation of everything as protection against future attempts at contact or manipulation, but Jessica seemed to have finally learned that her actions had consequences she couldn't charm or lie her way out of.